Hi everybody and welcome to the RSK webinar, Boiler Ban, Plotting the UK's Transition to Renewable Heating. My name is Lucy Sheriff and I will be moderating the panel today, and we've got some fantastic speakers lined up, but first I'm going to give you a few housekeeping notes. So last month we heard about the damage cars do to our planet, but what about where we live? Today we're going to hear about the impact our homes, and specifically our boilers, have on the environment, but more importantly, what we can actually do about it. We're going to hear from some of the world's leading experts on the topic, but first of all, a little bit about social media. We strongly encourage you to engage with RSK on social media, but please do tag us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook and Twitter at RSK Group, and if you could use the hashtag Green Dialogues, then we can follow along the conversation too. All attendees' microphones are automatically muted throughout the webinar, and during the presentation you can post questions, and there will be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. As many questions as possible will be answered, and those that can't be answered due to time constraints will be answered after the webinar via email. Shortly after the webinar ends, you will receive a link to a short survey. If you could take a few minutes to provide feedback, please do, so we can improve on our future webinars. Our first speaker today is Darren Snaith, Business Development Director at RSK. Darren, if you could join us on camera. Hi.
Hi, Lucy. Hi.
How are you doing?
Yeah, very well. Thank you. Very well.
Wonderful. So Darren has over 20 years of experience, which has made him an expert in the housing sector. He's got a particular focus on sustainable refurbishment and has become a leader in this field, helping clients to cut energy usage, reduce fuel poverty, and improve building aesthetics. I'm going to disappear so you can start with your talk.
Hi, welcome. Good afternoon. I'm Darren Snaith from RSK and I'm the Business Development Director, specifically focusing on renewable heat. Today I'll be looking at whether the public really want to replace their gas boilers. Just a short introduction then to RSK. We're a leading integrated environmental engineering and technical services provider. We're a rapidly growing company, and it feels like almost by the day a new company has joined the group. One of the specific growth areas that we're focusing on is renewable heat. This is where I come in, and I'm looking for opportunities within that rapidly developing sector. In preparation for this event and to gain an understanding of where the general public are in terms of domestic heating and the boiler ban and how much they know about it, RSK commissioned a survey which was carried out by Census Wide in August. We spoke to over 2,000 homeowners, and we think it's one of the first in the UK which is tackling this subject. In this presentation, I'll cover some of the highlights of the survey, and we'll provide full access to the survey following the event. Initially, we thought it was important to establish where the public are in terms of understanding the main contributors to climate change. The WWF commissioned a report and put out a report in March 2020, and they highlighted in that report that domestic heating was the biggest contributor to climate change. Our survey, though, shows that the public don't really understand that, with only 13% pointing to homes as being the largest contributor, while the biggest one they thought is cars and car fuel. So in terms of the government's targets and the plans to phase out gas boilers, which is kicking in from 2025, we found that people were somewhat aware of this, with over 50% saying they knew about the plans. Interestingly, though, the younger age groups were far more aware, and I think this is a really positive thing, and it's something that we saw throughout the survey, the younger groups tend to be a lot more switched on when it comes to climate change issues and the things that the government are doing in terms of tackling that. A real positive for me is to come out of the survey is that people are willing to change to reduce the impact on the environment. And certainly the vast majority of people are willing to change their heating system for that reason, willing to change it so it has a positive effect in terms of tackling climate change. When it comes to the type of system that they would consider, a large amount of people said they would be willing to change to an environmentally friendly alternative, such as an air source heat pump, ground source heat pump, hydrogen boiler, etc. So people would be willing to change, but how much do they think it would cost them? The average assumed cost to get an air source heat pump from the survey was £3,290, which really actually is some way short of the current government estimate. The government and BEIS is saying that a full system install will cost between £7,000 and £14,000. It's also worth bearing in mind as well that the government is putting some funding on the table in the form of the Clean Heat Grant, and that will amount to £4,000. But are people aware of that, and will that be enough? So we found out that generally the answer is no, they're not aware of the government initiatives, with 64% saying, you know, they've not heard anything about that, and they don't understand the initiatives. But when it comes to making an extra contribution, the vast majority are willing to pay extra if that new heating system delivered a reduction to their heating bill. When it comes specifically to installing a heat pump, 79% of people said with adequate financial support, they would be willing to do that. Is £4,000 going to be enough? My gut feeling from the survey is no. However, I'm already reading some positive noises from the government that they may be willing to push this up to £7,000, but I think it's a case of let's wait and see at the moment. In summary then, people are generally willing to change. They're also willing to consider a renewable alternative to their gas boiler. Would that alternative be a heat pump? Well, yes, possibly, if there's enough financial incentive to support that and offset the cost. So thank you for listening. There's my contact details if you'd like to get in touch. Also, I'm readily available on LinkedIn if you'd like to contact me via that source. Thank you.
Thank you so much for kicking us off, Darren, with such a strong start. I'd love to know whether you think if air source heat pumps alone will be the answer to replacing gas boilers.
I think that what we often make the mistake with this sort of thing, and I've seen this through the energy efficiency sector throughout in my career, is that there's a tendency to look for a silver bullet for the one solution. I think air source heat pumps have got a big part to play, as have ground source heat pumps, but for very different reasons. Also, we've got hydrogen boilers coming up. I really do think air source heat pumps will be a big percentage of the 600,000 heat pumps that the government want to get to by 2027, 2028. But for me, it's going to be a very much blended approach in terms of measures.
Mm-hmm. And how easy do you think it will be for private homeowners to adopt these kinds of new technologies?
I think that's going to be a challenge. That's one of the challenging areas. I think as a society in the UK, which has been dominated by the gas boiler, we're very used to instantaneous heat. Heat pumps work in a very different way, and sometimes the adaptation to the homeowner of that new technology is quite difficult to grasp. So I think there's a really big job for the industry, all stakeholders in the industry and government to really teach people and really let them know how these new technologies work.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your insights, and we will be seeing you at the end of the panel for our group Q&A. But next up, we have Jenny McDonnell, MBE, who is Knowledge Transfer Manager at KTN. Hi, Jenny.
Hi, Lucy.
So with more than 2 decades of experience in the thermal energy sector, Jenny is a specialist in thermal technology infrastructure. Her work has had such an impact that she was awarded an MBE for services to the green economy earlier this year. She facilitates collaborations between industry and research and has pioneered developments in domestic, commercial and industrial scale heating. Can't wait to hear what you've got to talk to us about. I'm going to disappear.
Thank you, Lucy. So hello, everyone. My name is Jenny McDonnell, as Lucy said, from the KTN, and I lead on thermal energy systems, supporting innovators developing heating and cooling technology from domestic scale all the way up to industrial scale across the UK. And today I'm going to talk to you about some of the low carbon heating options that will be available to us. Excuse me. So why do we need to change? Well, heating accounts for around 1/3 of the UK's greenhouse gas emissions, and only about 1 million of the 29 million homes in the UK have some form of low carbon heating installed at the moment. Now, hopefully the boiler ban is going to start to change that, but we do need to act now if we want to meet our net zero carbon goals. What's required is a national heat map roadmap to provide that long-term vision and a much more joined up policy approach, which hopefully the heat and building strategy will give us clarity on, and incentives to encourage consumers, industry and local government to act. So what are some of the options for low carbon heating? Well, to be on track for our net zero goal, the UK government lists a number of near-term actions that we need to achieve. First of all, we need to make our homes more energy efficient, and they have a target of homes being at a level of EPC level C by 2035. They do caveat that where it's cost effective and practical, and that does mean that quite a lot of homes won't make that level C standard. The second point is that we need to grow the UK heat pump market. And you'll have seen in last year's 10-point plan that a very ambitious target to be deploying annually 600,000 heat pumps by 2028. It is a great goal to aim at, but whether we can actually achieve that by 2028 is another matter. The third point is scaling up of hydrogen for heating, and with a focus on green hydrogen production. That again has its challenges because green hydrogen production has not really been demonstrated at scale yet, but the government is providing a substantial amount of funding to make that happen. And then point 4, we need to expand on the use of low carbon heat networks, especially where there's a source of waste heat that we can take advantage of and in densely populated areas. So looking at some of the technologies, heat pumps, as I'm sure you know, are a form of electrical heating. They use power to transfer heat from outside of our homes into our home. So they draw in the warmth from the air or the ground or sometimes water, and a compressor within the heat pump upgrades that to a temperature that's suitable for space heating or transfers the heat into our central heating system. And above 0 degrees centigrade, for every unit of electricity used by the heat pump, it produces 3 or 4 units of heat. So it is a very efficient way of heating your home, but it does require your home to be quite thermally efficient as well. Otherwise, it will require more electricity. The second option is hydrogen boilers. Now, hydrogen gas has been proposed as a low carbon alternative to natural gas. With 23 million homes being on the gas grid, the hydrogen can be delivered through the existing gas grid to those homes. And hydrogen, 100% hydrogen boilers have been demonstrated within homes by the 4 main boiler manufacturers. And they also have offer hydrogen-ready boilers to buy today, which would run on natural gas, and then with a small change, switch over to hydrogen once hydrogen reaches your area. So this isn't as far away as some people think. The government is also supporting it with the H100 project, which started this year, and that will deploy 100% green hydrogen for heating to 300 homes in Fife. And the third option is heat networks. This is where the heat is generated in a central point and then transported out to a network of homes via underground insulated pipes, avoiding the need for each individual home to have a boiler or a heat pump. The heat is brought into the home through a heat exchanger, which is about the same size as a boiler, so no additional space is required for this option. The fuel used to generate the heat at the moment tends to be natural gas, but there's no reason why the heat couldn't be generated by a heat pump, hydrogen, or biomass as well. So there are a number of challenges that these three options have individually, but I've chosen three challenges that they have in common in some way. So first of all, cost. Heat pumps are very expensive to buy and install. I would estimate between 7,000 and 10,000, so I'm a little bit cheaper than Bayes. But compared to a gas boiler, which is about £3,500, that's a lot of money to put out. But once you have it installed, the cost of power is very comparable with gas because the heat pump is generating 3 times the amount of heat versus the power used. Hydrogen boilers, on the other hand, are cheap to buy. The boiler manufacturers estimate they will be about £4,000 because they are very similar to gas boilers. But the cost of the gas at the moment is very expensive, approximately 30 pence per kilowatt hour for hydrogen gas. And then last, heat networks are expensive to install because the infrastructure doesn't exist. So digging those trenches, putting the pipes in is very costly. The second challenge is infrastructure. So heat pumps and hydrogen have a similar problem. The infrastructure exists, but it's not really ready for the demand. So heat pumps will put, if we all have a heat pump, we'll put additional load on the electricity grid, and so that will require upgrading. Hydrogen, there's an issue with hydrogen embrittlement with the existing gas grid pipework. So that pipework needs to be converted to plastic pipes which are compatible with hydrogen. So again, that is an upgrade that's required. And then heat networks, obviously the infrastructure doesn't exist yet, so that has to be put in place. And then the third challenge is around consumer hesitancy. So as Darren said, heat pumps are a completely new way of heating a home, and you don't get that direct heat when you want it. You have to educate people on how to manage that better, particularly as I said, the majority of people in the UK are on gas heating at the moment. Hydrogen gas should be more familiar to consumers because it is a gas, but there still is a bit of a stigma around using hydrogen, and that again needs a bit of education to reassure consumers that it is safe to use. And finally, heat networks require consumers to allow somebody else to manage their heating for them, and not everybody is comfortable with that. So in conclusion, I think the UK government needs to provide guidance on the relative roles of these different types of low carbon options for decarbonising heating in homes. They are supporting the development of new markets for hydrogen, heat pumps and heat networks, but are they going far enough? The infrastructure required for all of these options is considerable, and we still need standards and regulations to be put in place. And without a more substantial support for upfront costs and operational costs, I don't think some of these things will happen. The UK has the ingenuity to solve these challenges, but how do we scale up the skills and capabilities required to actually install this in people's houses in the time frame? So there still are some challenges there that need to be overcome, but on the whole, I'm optimistic about the future, and I do think that we will get to our net zero goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jenny. I'd love to know which carbon heating option you think the government should be supporting.
I do think it will require a mixture of all three. I think it will depend on your situation, your location. So if you're in a rural location, which I am, I'm not on the gas grid, so heat pumps is the most obvious choice to go for. I think if you're near one of the industrial clusters, which are all 5 of the main industrial clusters are in the process of switching over to hydrogen, then it makes sense that there will be residential areas around them will take advantage of that and have hydrogen delivered. And then heat networks, as I said earlier, they're best suited for densely populated areas like cities or apartment blocks, where you can take advantage of that short distance of the pipe work has to travel to get the heat to you. So I don't think there will be one solution is the only solution. It will be a mixture of all 3 to get us to net zero.
Makes sense. Well, thank you so much. And again, we'll see you in a bit for our Q&A at the end. We've got some great questions coming through already, so please keep them coming in the questions box and we will ask the panelists at the end. So next up we have David Kemp, who heads up sustainability and growth at Procure Plus. Hi, David.
Hi, Lucy, and yeah, thanks for the introduction. So yeah, I've been asked to talk through some of the wider implications arising from the main solutions for domestic heat that are being touted around at the moment. So first off, a very quick introduction to Procure Plus. I'm not going to talk through this in any detail other than to mention we're a not-for-commercial profit social housing and public sector procurement and regeneration company, and that is a mouthful. And we manage several framework agreements and other procurement routes that social housing providers and local authorities use for property investment works. This is delivering cashable best value to the customer, as well as significant social value outcomes. So last year, use of our frameworks resulted in £125 million worth of spend, 17 million quid's worth of savings, but ultimately it generated 769 job outcomes, employment opportunities for people in the communities where our landlords and our customers operate. So you can read the rest of the slide at your leisure, or drop me a line afterwards. So we all know why net zero is important, and that's not the challenge I want to highlight in this particular slide. All zero carbon deadlines have been calculated effectively with a carbon budget in mind. That's a share of the total amount of carbon that can be released into the atmosphere to limit temperature increases to 1.5 degrees C and ensure that we don't fry. The UK has calculated it, sure, and it set itself the target of 2050 to be net zero carbon. Other bodies like the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, or where I'm based, they've set a different target. In GM's case, the target is 2038 to be net zero, and the Tyndall Centre calculated GM's share of Greater Manchester's share of the UK's carbon emissions to be 15 million tonnes. So every day that emissions reductions don't at least deliver this linear reduction curve, the black line on the graph there, we're effectively adding to that carbon budget. If no effort is made into emissions reduction, and net zero is achieved in one big hit on the 31st of December 2049 or 2037 in Greater Manchester for that matter, the carbon budget's gone, we've spent it, and the maximum temperature increase of 1.5 degrees C may no longer be possible. Effectively, the area under all carbon reduction graphs is actually more important than the trajectory of reduction itself. That's how much carbon we've got to play with. So with this in mind, we know significant investment is needed to get us to net zero, and it's going to cost money. We also know that this will bring economic benefits and create jobs. Likewise, we also know that doing nothing and dealing with the effects of climate change after the event is going to cost more in the long run than dealing with the issues before it goes berserk and runs wild. The latest and quite frankly alarming IPCC report, it states that the amount of carbon emissions in the atmosphere that are going to trigger 1.5 degrees temperature increases, well, that's going to be hit in the mid-2030s. And that's going to result in irreversible ecological impacts. And these are pretty big things, really. And what I think this means is that inroads into carbon emissions are needed to be made now. And realistically, I don't think we can wait for hydrogen as a domestic heating solution. The hydrogen strategy published by government, confirms an aspiration for 5 gigawatts of low carbon heat by 2030. And in the grand scheme of things, as shown in the graph here that I've amended, it's one of Tom Baxter's, Professor Tom Baxter from Aberdeen University, I believe. He's tweaked this national grid infographic, and you can see what 5 gigawatts of low carbon hydrogen looks like. In the grand scheme of things, it's not a lot, but it is drawing significant amounts of political interest and public financial support. So if we can't wait for hydrogen, are we not even going to wait for, is blue or green hydrogen not suitable for domestic heat? Well, in my view, not at any scale, and certainly not blue. So recent research from Cornell and Stanford University shows that blue hydrogen, so that's the stuff that's manufactured with carbon capture and storage, is better than traditional grey hydrogen. But when it's burnt as a natural gas replacement, as would be the case with hydrogen boilers up and down the country, it's actually worse than natural gas from a carbon footprint perspective. The UK Climate Change Committee, they also back a hydrogen bridge for certain areas of the economy, but that needs to be replaced by green hydrogen over time. So if green hydrogen's good, why don't we push for that now as a domestic heating solution? Well, going back to the need to reduce emissions now, there simply isn't enough renewable energy to make this stuff. Likewise, the amount of additional renewable energy investment to make sufficient quantities of hydrogen for us to burn in domestic boilers is significantly greater than if we decided electrification of domestic heat was a better immediate solution. So we've got all these issues in relation to in relation to time, but we can't forget the consumer either. So I can't see how blue or green hydrogen can ever be cheaper than the input fuels, whether it's gas or electricity, needed to make it when you take into account production losses and things of that nature. The only way it can't be is if there are subsidies involved in hydrogen production, which, if coming from government, are ultimately paid for by the consumer, you and I, in some way, shape or form. The actual cost of production of blue hydrogen, at least, is still not clear. And the chair of the UK Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association, he resigned recently, citing false claims from industry on production costs. So on top of the unit costs for the fuel, there are infrastructure upgrades as well. And as Jenny's already mentioned, transporting the gas with a very different property to that of natural gas will need paying for. So gas network upgrades. And before anyone jumps in, yes, there are going to be similar costs associated with upgrading the electrical network, along with short and long-term energy storage solutions. But don't forget, the electrical network would probably need upgrading anyway if we were going to manufacture all this renewable electricity-driven green hydrogen, for all the electrolyzers. So either way, we are looking at improving the electrical network, whether hydrogen is deemed to be a viable domestic heating solution. So, in summary, net zero needs lots and lots of investment, and it needs it now to ensure the worst of the changes that we see is only 1.5 degree temperature increases before the end of the century. So there's no debate in my mind at all that all solutions are going to be required. Hydrogen, direct electric, heat pumps, biofuels. It's not a debate about one magic solution or silver bullet over another. But in light of the timescales required for decarbonisation, I think the short to medium term solution for domestic heat appears to be electrification. So even in the longer term, when green hydrogen is more common, I'm still not convinced that we should be looking at burning it in people's homes. So referencing the old Heineken adverts of old, for those that are old enough to remember them, hydrogen should be used to reach the parts of the economy that other energy sources cannot reach. So thinking in industrial, chemical processing, certain forms of transport, perhaps. Commercial and industrial sources could easily soak up the amount of low carbon hydrogen produced now and in the medium term, to truly deliver carbon savings now. So we need to ensure we've got a viable gas network, which delivers truly low carbon green hydrogen. And we need the green hydrogen economy too. So investment is needed. But let's not sell this investment need on the back of a misguided and distracting green hydrogen in domestic heating narrative. When it comes to blue hydrogen, I'm more certain the best short to medium term use for this is to replace the current uses for grey hydrogen, and only until enough green can be made. And I think it's counterproductive to what we're collectively trying to achieve, and potentially irresponsible even, to suggest that blue hydrogen as a natural gas replacement for the domestic sector is a low carbon solution when it's been demonstrated actually not to be the case. So horses for courses, and I don't think domestic heating is necessarily the right horse for hydrogen, or the right course even. But what's not really covered in any meaningful way at the minute is something that's often overlooked, and that's the role of reducing demand and embedded microgeneration. So things like solar PV or solar thermal, for instance, in this infrastructure debate. Both of these things are the only way of actually guaranteeing energy bill reductions for consumers, and both of these approaches would reduce the infrastructure upgrade costs, regardless of which energy vector is chosen. Basically, you need less stuff, so you don't need to upgrade the infrastructure quite as much. So yeah, that's me. Thank you for listening. Hopefully nothing too contentious, and yeah, delegates found this interesting.
Thank you so much, David. That was fascinating. I'd love to know whether you advocate a complete ban on gas boilers now, or whether it's something that needs to be phased in gradually.
I think for new build, the argument's quite clear. Yeah, we don't need combustion in our new build properties. For the domestic sector, I would suggest probably an outright ban tomorrow would be counterproductive. We've already mentioned, I think, Darren's run through it as well. Supply chains not really geared up to switch over from domestic gas at any meaningful scale. It would probably result in some questionable installations, and in the long run, I think it would be a little bit counterproductive. But by signposting, over time, a staged approach to the phasing out of domestic gas boilers, that seems to make a lot more sense. But we will need some. There will be some properties, there will be some solutions that, going back to the Heineken concept, that will need a combustion-based fuel, I would have thought. So even with a boiler ban per se, there'll still be some boilers going in the right circumstances.
So essentially a lot of work to do, but thank you so much, and we will see you in a little while. But next up we have Dan Meredith, who is Senior Manager at E.ON UK. Dan, if you could join us on camera. Oh, I'm going to start with his introduction in case he's having some camera issues. Oh, there he is.
I'm here. Sorry, Lisa. Yeah, I'm here. Thank you.
So bringing 20 years of industry experience, Dan is an expert in energy policy and stakeholder engagement. He works with multinational energy companies in the UK, Belgium, and Germany, and a background in climate science has supported Dan's work on developing green recovery strategies for both E.ON and RWE npower across Europe in both the policy and public affairs domain. Dan, I will leave it to you.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Yes, Dan Meredith. I work for E.ON, a policy expert at E.ON. Just want to say, really interesting presentation so far. Completely agree with David's thesis, particularly on hydrogen and the need to get on and do something now instead of waiting. And that's where I'll pick up. I think there's some really interesting and useful lessons for industry and particularly for government from E.ON's own experience. At the moment, we are, as I'm sure people know, a very large energy company across Europe and particularly in the UK. We do an awful lot of energy efficiency measures, have done for many years, and lead the market in many ways, and deliver a lot of the obligations for other energy suppliers as well. And as you can see on the screen, how much impact we've had over that time. We also have some really interesting lessons that we've learned in the past. When I started at E.ON, when it was power gen more than 20 years ago, we were obviously a large power generator with a large fossil fuel power station fleet, as we used to have. And the lessons learned from taking that coal-fired power station fleet and changing it to renewables that the power sector has achieved in this country is a really useful lesson, and has given us some real useful insights for how to make that change in the policy framework that needs to happen. Now, of course, the challenges, as the other speakers have already set out, for homes is a lot bigger. Let me go back on those slides. There we go. And a lot different to the power sector. But there's some really useful things to pick out there. The UK is particularly blessed with loving gas boilers. We, more than anybody else in Europe, have more gas boilers doing our heating in homes. So we tend to think of anything other than gas boilers as being new or different and something we don't particularly like. Not necessarily the truth when you look around the rest of the world at how other people tend to heat their homes. We must remember that. We're also blessed with a lot of old homes. And that obviously means that some of them are brilliant and lovely, we want to keep them, but a lot of them are leaky and don't retain their heat very well, as the brilliant little chart there from Tado, the smart controls manufacturer, pulled together. We don't do particularly well in energy efficiency in this country, and more than anything else, that is where we need to put our effort first and foremost. It doesn't really matter whether, if we're wrong about hydrogen and it turns up and saves everybody as a silver bullet, or that we need to get on and do district heating or heat pumps. Energy efficiency and lowering the demand for energy across the board is absolutely the right thing to start with for homes. And as you can see, the problem is about education, and there's a real pinch point on skills. Lots of people aren't aware, as Darren's point already said, about what impact their gas boilers has on the climate. and there are so few low carbon heating engineers, particularly compared to gas engineers, who we as homeowners will inevitably go and ask most commonly, what should we do next? And that's a real problem. But I wanted to bring it back to why it's important that we must take action, particularly on heating, but across the economy now. The UK has done pretty well on reducing its carbon emissions so far. If we were still on our 80% target, which was the first target we had in the Climate Change Act 10 years ago, we'd be about halfway there. We've done a 40% reduction, roughly, from the 1990 levels that we've seen. But that's all been done by this switch from fossil fuels to renewables in the power sector. As you can see from the chart, most of the other areas of the economy have been pretty static over that time. And if we're going to stay on the trajectory that we need to meet our carbon targets, and as you can see, it's not just all about 2050, as David said, we've got some serious interim targets to get on and do already. We've got to start making some real impact on the rest of the economy, and homes and housing particularly is the place to go. The lessons that I think are most important that we've learned from the switch to renewables in the power sector is how we do it. And the most important lesson of all is that it's all about cost. And as we've seen already from the presentations, you know, the most important thing for most people when they're making decisions is going to be the cost of these things. And that was where we were with wind farms and solar panels 20 years ago. They were very expensive. We weren't really sure if they were going to be able to deliver at the scale that we needed. But by the government pump priming that market and making sure the demand was there and the industry was able to deliver projects again and again and again and get economies of scale and really bring some innovation in and know how to do it well, we can do it cheaply. And as we've seen in the power sector, those technologies, wind farms, solar panels, the rest of them are the cheapest forms of getting that power now. And that's what we're seeing in car batteries and electric vehicles right at this moment. And we're going to see that in the heating sector if the government pump prime the market now and give those subsidies and support mechanisms as soon as we can. And I think that's really important to say. It's very important for everybody to realise that when we need subsidies early, it is not industry asking for subsidies forever. That's not a solution. We are always looking towards subsidy free, and that is the way to get it, is to pump prime the market, bring economies of scale to bear, and then you get that crashing of the prices. And we're pretty confident that by the end of the decade, the prices that you saw for heat pumps will have at least halved if we get the government support that we need to do today. I think that's where I'll leave it. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dan. That was fantastic. I'd love to know how you think we can get homeowners to invest in changing their heating.
Yeah, I think it's not easy. There's a number of different mechanisms, I guess, and it's going to be about cost, and it's going to be about education and information. I think government is in control of those costs, and industry need to bring forward the propositions that are going to make people want to have them. I'm a big supporter of what we've seen in electric vehicles. They've become aspirational. We're never going to be quite the same on heating systems. It's a little bit more boring and less sexy, but nevertheless, you know, we've got to get something that is better than we've got today to make people want to have them. The information is really important as well. I'm a big supporter of the idea that every building in this country has to have a building renovation passport. And I really think that we need to get a scheme like that in place as soon as possible so that people can plan in these changes. As we've seen, it's going to be potentially disruptive, but we do disruptive things to our houses all the time. That's not a problem, but we've just got to be, as homeowners, be able to plan it in. So I know in 3 years' time, if I'm going to do redecorating or change the kitchen, I can change the pipeworks and the insulation as well.
Yes, definitely. And what do you think homeowners could start doing today?
I think energy efficiency is absolutely key. I think David, as we've seen, is right, and the government strategy on hydrogen is clear. You know, we can't sit on our hands and just wait for a great hope to come along and save everything. That's not going to be around. We've got to do what we can do today. Heat pumps are there, they are expensive. I think we're going to see some support from government soon from the heat and building strategy, and we'll see probably from the budget at some point before Christmas, probably before COP, that we actually get some support, we understand what's going on. There are schemes in place. So as a homeowner, I'd absolutely say, look, check with someone that you trust. Find an organisation that you trust. Yeah, hopefully, I would say that. But come and talk to someone that you understand and trust to find out whether you're already capable of getting grants and schemes and supports for you to do some changes. But focus on the energy efficiency first. Once you've got that sorted, then I'd recommend a heat pump, particularly if you're off grid, like Jenny's already said. I think if you're not on a gas system, that's a no-brainer as well.
Yeah, it definitely seems education is going to be a key factor in this. Thank you so much for your insights, and we will see you in a few minutes after we've heard from Will. So Will, if you could join us on screen. Will Ray is Head of Sustainability at Clarion Group. For 20 years, Will has worked on the leading edge of sustainable low-carbon construction. His approach to low-carbon retrofitting in existing structures has helped Clarion become the first UK housing group to attain the Sustainable Housing Impact label. Looking forward to hearing what you have to tell us.
Thanks, Lucy. Right, for the presentation. So today I'm going to give you the perspective of a large landlord and developer on this, and a social landlord and developer on this issue. Clarion Housing Group is the largest social landlord in the country, with a heritage dating back over 100 years. We provide, our mission, if you like, is to provide good quality and affordable homes to people priced out of the market. We have around about 125,000 homes currently across the UK, across England, in more than 170 local authorities. And the vast majority of these are social homes. We're a developer as well, and a growing developer, building thousands of affordable homes every year. And we like to invest in our residents and their communities through our charitable foundation, Clarion Futures. So I thought I'd give you a bit of perspective on the current situation that we see within our stock and within our residents. Fuel poverty, I think, is something that's been mentioned before by panelists, but in terms of where we see it as a social landlord housing some of the most vulnerable people in society, we estimate, based on our figures and assessments, around 25% of our residents are at risk of fuel poverty, according to the government definition. And around, this is confirmed by estimates around fuel prepayment meters. We estimate that up to 40% of residents are on prepayment meters, most by choice, because they're balancing their budget week to week. In addition to that, when we've surveyed residents, as we do very often annually and beyond, we find that 1 in 5 households report that they go without heating within the past couple of years to save money. And surprisingly, rather than pensioners, actually most of these people are households of working age. In addition, residents have increasing worries about energy costs and the financial stress within the current environment, where we find ourselves with employment issues, stagnant incomes, and fuel prices rising very sharply. In terms of our stock, we've treated a lot of the poorest performing properties. Where we're left with today is the majority of our properties in the D and C EPC bands. That means they still need improvement in terms of their basic energy efficiency, but it does mean we've gone beyond what the private rented sector has done and what private homeowners have done. At the moment, at least 85% of our properties have gas boilers, either individual or communal systems, and we have within our stock over nearly 1,000 heat pumps installed of various types. In terms of the replacement rate of the boilers that we have, we are replacing in the single thousands of boilers annually. It varies up and down, but that points to the time duration that this will take to create transformation. We are working flat chat with those boiler replacements. So, you know, this is a project that will take a significant period of time and cannot be scaled up and delivered instantly. Where do I think the boiler ban sits in terms of the issues for social housing? Well, fuel poverty prevalence means that energy efficiency, as the other speakers have said, needs to come first. And we have this issue that at the moment there's a lack of agreed energy efficiency standards. You know, what constitutes a zero carbon ready home or retrofitted home, so that's an issue for us, and we don't know where we're aiming. The solutions from the heating and efficiency side are not a one size fit all. You know, a London apartment block to rural housing looks very, very different. And the products themselves, the heating products, whilst they've been adapted from European and technology from major Asian providers, they've only spent a short time within the UK market, and they do need to adapt to the unique housing stock that we have. So there's still room for improvement and innovation. I think importantly as well at the moment, whilst we have many people talking about what the plan should be, and you've heard the speakers before mention that, there is no clear plan at the moment for scaling zero carbon ready heating sources and the efficiency improvements needed for that. The heating building strategy is coming, but then the question for us at a very practical level is, what are the choices we're going to make on a building by building, estate by estate basis? You know, when is it going to be hydrogen? When is that? How much are our residents going to be paying? And I think, as well as Darren mentioned before, residents still need to be brought on the journey. The recent survey last week by another social housing provider suggested that nearly 2/3 of social housing tenants have never heard of the term net zero. This points to the need to really educate and engage with consumers. So what are we doing to prepare? Well, the first and most important thing, as David mentioned about the data and building passports, is really looking to improve our data and risk assessing our portfolio. We are pushing ahead with a new build standard that incorporates no fossil fuel heating and is ready for a zero carbon world. And we're doing pilots of these technologies, these skills, these processes and finance models that will work. So the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, in terms of retrofit on the new build, we've got projects that are being built towards the Future Home Standard. And then on standard replacements, you know, where we are off grid, we are looking to replace with heat pumps. We're focused always, though, on the lowest rating properties at the greatest risk of fuel poverty, integrating the technologies that are proven, that make change cost effective and meet the needs of our residents. So finally, what do we need to make the change happen more quickly or more broadly within, particularly for landlords? Well, we need the right policy package. The Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund is a good start, and it's an efficiency first approach, but we need more in this area. We also need that plan for heat decarbonisation, and all the things that previous speakers have talked about needs to be involved in that, including financing. From an asset management and a supply chain point of view, we clearly need better technical solutions and agreement on what the minimum and best practice is for energy efficiency, backed up with a skills program and an approach that means that we can integrate decarbonisation to our planned maintenance and replacements and improve some of the basic parts of this problem, which is very simple stuff like residential heating design being better and ready for the zero carbon world. And finally, I'd love to see, like this seminar, but going a lot further, sharing data and experience across the sector and across the supply chain. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Will. That was fascinating. Would you be able to elaborate on what mechanisms you think might work to help finance this change?
Yeah, I think we need to think about the burden of where this transition is occurring and where the burden of finance goes. If we take on the burden as a landlord and developer, it is going to limit our capacity to deliver affordable homes. So that's a question that the government needs to consider. If the residents take this on, we really need to think about that fuel poverty issue. And if government's going to take this on, obviously there's significant financial stress there. So there's a balance between the three. But I think there are models that have been picked up, particularly in the Green Finance Institute Coalition for Energy Efficient Buildings report that they did on zero carbon heating. And I think, you know, for the social housing sector and rental sector in general, you know, gross rent models or service charge models that share the cost and share the benefit between you know, housing providers and residents and the government with some subsidy involved. I think that are perfect models that can work in the longer term.
Agreed. I'm actually going to ask you to stay on camera as it's now time for our group Q&A. And if everybody else could turn their cameras and their microphones on, that would be fantastic. We've had some really great questions through, more than we may be able to answer. But if we don't get to your question, then we will do our best to answer it via email after the webinar ends. So unless specified, I'm going to open all these questions up to everybody in the panel. So the first question we have is, when when does the panel think the tipping point will come for these transformative technologies in heating? Will it be in time to meet climate targets? Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. As I said in my presentation, I think it's got to be now. We're kind of already a bit late, but with the heat and building strategy being delayed so much, we could have started before now. Yeah, now please.
I'd agree. I think again, going back to my experience of the power sector, it took everybody by surprise how quickly wind and solar suddenly took off. There was absolutely a tipping point, and it took a little bit longer than people might have expected, but when it happened, it went like that and took everybody surprise. People were still building gas-fired power stations because they thought that was the future. And I think the same will happen in homes. It just takes, as we're seeing in EVs and electric vehicles today, it just takes the right conditions from government to make people make that decision. As soon as that happens and industry get hold of it and start innovating, then it goes.
Looking at solar PV as an example, you know, a system back in the day was 8-10 grand, and now you're looking at the same, you know, a 4 kilowatt peak system for less than 4 grand installed. If we support the development of the market, it will start to grow itself. I think you're spot on, Dan. Yeah,
I think from a contractor's perspective, we're starting to feel it accelerate. So we're starting to feel it really go, and starting to feel things that we've been hoping for to happen are starting to happen. So I'm starting to feel really positive about it.
Yeah, from a landlord perspective, we know we have to start today with the pilots and learning work that we're doing, because, you know, if we're going to be doing heat pumps or hydrogen boilers or any combination thereof by 2030, you know, at a very full-on pace, you know, we need to make the changes in skills and training and technology development now. So that's what we're doing.
But it does need, I think, significant investment by the government. The Clean Heat Grant next year is great, and Ofgem's just opened their Strategic Innovation Fund to try and sort out the infrastructure, but you need way more than that. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the strategy coming out.
Yeah, we're all nodding.
Yeah, we're all waiting.
It's a long process. So the next question we have is, I am curious about what the actual efficiency of hydrogen boiler heating would be after you factor in production, storage, transmission and combustion losses. I have never heard a confident figure for this, but guess it may be around 70%, which lags well behind heat pumps.
Well, if whoever asked that question, if they go back and look at my presentation, there was an infographic from, I think, the Institute for Clean Transport, I think it is, and they've done some number crunching on that particular question, and using green hydrogen, so electrolyzer manufactured hydrogen. I think from memory it was around about 50 to 60% efficient at the actual, you know, burner within the boiler. But I can't remember my own presentation. Apologies. It's on there somewhere.
I think as well, we're at a point where we've the demonstrations with Baxi and Bosch and the other boiler manufacturers have only just happened in the last 12 months. So the results of that hasn't come out, and we also need the results from the H100 project that I mentioned, which is how hydrogen is being supplied and the scale of production. It's quite hard to say what the efficiency will be until those projects have actually finished and got the result.
So just as a reminder to all the attendees, we will be sending the recording of this panel, so you can always go back and have a look at the slides. Another question we've had in is, what is the lifespan of an air pump compared to a gas boiler? And very important, what impact will the UK weather have regarding rusting of an air pump?
So I think in terms of comparing to a gas boiler, you might expect a gas boiler to last 10 or 15 years. Certainly a heat pump can do that. I think some manufacturers, if you Google it, some manufacturers will claim they can get 25 to 30 years out of it. Really, it's about maintenance. It's about maintaining them, proper maintenance program like you would a gas boiler. In terms of coping with extremes, coastal locations, etc., I know that the manufacturers, people like Dakin, Valent, etc., build in coatings, etc., to cope with that. And I would suggest if you live in one of those locations, specifically have a look at how the manufacturer copes with it. Remember, these things are basically they've been around a long time and in other extreme environments, so the manufacturers are prepared for it.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I think, as I sort of mentioned in my bit of the presentation, we tend to think in the UK that gas boilers is the only real option out there at the moment. But it's in Germany particularly, I think a third of homes that were built this year had heat pumps fitted, and I know the Scandinavian countries do a lot of heat pumps compared to us. Even France do a lot of heat pumps compared to us. So I think I've got no real qualms that they can fit the British weather any worse than any of those climates.
I'm going to move on to the next two questions. I'm going to kind of give them to you at once because they're both to do with retrofitting, which I think is a really, really important topic. So the first one is, do you not think that improving the fabric and airtightness of the house should be the first focus to reduce the energy load, and then consider what heating system they should install? And then the second question was, it is said that the most sustainable building is the building that already exists. Should the UK seek to make available 300,000 dwellings a year by conversion and rehabilitation of its existing building stock rather than new construction?
Ooh, interesting.
I can have a crack.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so from my perspective, yes, absolutely, fabric first is the way to go. I think, you know, as I discussed in my presentation, the question is what standard that fabric needs to be at, and also considering the variety of UK, you know, housing stock, which could be, you know, 18th, 19th century right through to the modern day. You know, what can you do that's appropriate to that environment? And I think, you know, the technology still evolving. If you like, we've got all the components, the insulation types and everything put together, but really in terms of development of the market, it's a bit like cars in the sort of early 1900s. We've got the engine, we've got the steering wheel, we kind of know how to put it together, but what we've built so far is a sort of a Daimler early vehicle. We've not built the Model T Ford or even the Tesla of retrofit. So we've got a long way to go to scale the market up to that. In terms of investing in our existing homes versus new homes, we need to do both. The demand for housing is such that we need to provide good new homes, you know, regeneration of homes, and reinvest in our existing stock. And it's going to be horses for courses, but you know, we need to do everything.
I think, yeah, Will, the lack of a coherent standard for energy efficiency is a challenge, because like law of diminishing returns and all that kind of stuff, there will become a point where it is more economical to not continue applying insulation to the external wall of a building, for example. I think, and actually look at a low carbon heating solution instead. You know, Bayes produced some research. I think the Carbon Trust did some stuff as well for the GLA, and you know, they suggested that an energy performance equivalent to a C for a property, or you know, the 90 watts per meter squared energy demand figure, as mentioned in the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, was effectively kind of like where you needed to be, rather than going absolutely berserk on fabric and sticking with that fossil fuel boiler. Because even with very, very low energy demand, if you're burning gas, you ain't got a net zero or a zero carbon property. So some clarity on that would, yeah, I think is very much required.
I think there's probably two things I'd say as well. First, on the reusing of homes, absolutely right, and completely echo what Will and David have said on that. I mean, I think it's really important. We work quite closely with a lot of council actually on a sort of empty homes proposition, where we can try and use some of the funding, say from ECO, and some of the support that is out there for energy efficiency, to try and get homes that are not being used at the moment back into the housing market, into circulation, which is really important, as well as the new build. It's always going to be easier to design new build for the right way. Retrofit is always going to be the hard thing to do. But the important thing for me is the government have to step up and make sure there is support systems. 2/3 of homes in the UK at the moment don't have any support mechanism to get people to do energy efficiency. It's all aimed at the hardest and the lowest incomes, which is the right place to start. But the rest of the population have to have some access and some reason to do energy efficiency as well. And if you look at the savings on your bills from just moving from an E to a D, or particularly a D to a C, you're saving hundreds of pounds a year on your energy bills, and that's really important right now for families. It's got to be a priority.
I think that leads very nicely into our next question, which is about finance. Some sectors will need subsidy, but is it a better route for homeowners to access affordable finance and then reduce the cost of electricity so that it is cost effective to migrate from fossil fuels to heat pumps?
Yeah, absolutely. If I can take certainly that one on the electricity costs, it's something we've been lobbying hard on government for a long time. It is crazy to think that almost a quarter of everybody's electricity bill is made up of levies that are added to the bill, which obviously gives an implicit subsidy to use gas and continue to use gas, which is not right. And even now, the hydrogen strategy, government are thinking, well, how do we pay for all that hydrogen stuff? We put a subsidy on electricity bills. That's not the right answer. So we have to start getting that.
It's perverse when you consider that the electricity is actually the lower carbon energy in the first place, and the levies are there to support carbon reduction. The spark gap is a massive issue, which definitely needs addressing.
I think we need to be the major thing though is we need to be really careful about those who are experiencing the effects of fuel poverty, and we do need to think about them first in terms of when there's allowances for affordable warmth through gas heating and the affordability of the gas costs. We need to translate that through and make sure that's continuous all the way through the transition, and that these people aren't left behind, our residents aren't left behind.
Yeah, and it's a great bit of work by sorry Jenny, go on, carry on.
I was just going to say, it does need to be not only the capital cost of doing it, but also support for the operation, the ongoing costs of having the energy as well, until the costs levelise. And energy costs shouldn't go up for the consumer because they're doing something that's responsible for the planet.
Yeah, I was just going to say that there's a brilliant bit of work, if people want to look it up, by a think tank called Public First, which looked at some of this on heat pumps and how you change it. You can take the cost, those levies off electricity bills, put them into national taxation, and you can put a tax on domestic heating and a sort of carbon tax on domestic heating. And actually the result of that is that people still using gas don't pay any more, but people using electricity pay less. And the Treasury don't lose out either. So it sort of really squares the circle. It's something we'd really support.
So just to change tack slightly, this is a really interesting question. Burning hydrogen produces a lot of nitrogen emissions, which cause environmental and human health issues. Are these domestic boilers manufactured to be able to control and reduce the amount of nitrogen produced? If so, what are the typical emissions?
Oh no, it's a short answer.
Beyond my technical capacity on that one.
It is a concern that's been raised by several organisations, I think, and there are tests that are ongoing at the moment. Obviously, the Baxi pilot and others, but there just isn't the data out there. There is a suspicion that it's going to be quite nasty, but it's just that at this stage, unless anybody else is aware of any data that's been produced. Jenny?
No, I agree that until we get the results of those demonstrations and much bigger projects like the 5 project, it's really hard to say whether it's worse or better.
Mm-hmm.
I think the difficulty that hydrogen faces overall is the fact that it is an unproven technology, whereas you have heat pumps, which is a proven technology either in heating climates or cooling climates, and you're selling, those are units in whatever form are being sold in the millions every year already. So it's got an uphill struggle.
Mm-hmm.
Well, just to defend the hydrogen boiler a little bit, it's been proven, it's just not commercial yet, and we haven't seen the results. So I think we just need to give them a bit of time to be able to prove their case.
I think it's also
Well,
worth just bigging up again the district heating as well, as Jenny put in her presentation. You know, it tends to get lost in the idea between heat pumps versus hydrogen, which is not really worth anybody's time. But the great thing about putting a heat network in, it's hard work for a local authority, a lot of planning issues and making it happen, as Jenny rightly said. But once it's there, it's pretty technology agnostic. I mean, we've got lots of heat networks around the country. We're putting in great big heat pumps in the one in the centre of London right now to prove that decarbonisation. So, you know, whatever wins out in the future, heat networks is always a good option as well.
Yeah, it's a shame that heat networks should get more support as well, because you need to put the cost of the heat interface unit down and the cost of actually putting the network in. And there's not been a lot of support for that recently.
While we're on the heat pumps topic, we've had another question. Can the air source heat pump system provide adequate heating during prolonged cold spells?
If it's designed appropriately, yeah, there's no reason why not.
Yeah. I think if you talk to manufacturers, there's heat pumps out there that are quite happy in sub-zero temperatures for prolonged. So as I said, you know, those climates in Germany and northern Scandinavia, which already use them much more prevalently than we do, are quite comfortable with that.
We've had a couple more finance questions come through. So how is the investment environment holding back the deployment of zero carbon heating?
It's a good question. I mean, from my own point of view, you know, I think the lack of certainty around the policy environment, it makes investment difficult. I think our experience from accessing things like the impact investment market through our sustainability bond issues and things like that suggests that the appetite is very strong amongst investors, where you can offer them products that are delivering on climate change commitments and on net zero or on absolute zero even, and the investors are interested in that long term. So you will get favorable financing rates, but you know that has to be something that can be proven in terms of scale and that is certain in terms of its delivery of outcomes and a policy environment that's stable, which we haven't had in the last 15 years in terms of energy efficiency, particularly in the UK.
Yeah, I'd echo that. At the very highest level, E.ON, obviously a multinational company, our investors are pushing us towards, we've signed up for net zero, the race to zero that the UK government have put on. So we've got that our own target for our company to get on and get to net zero by 2050, and that's all our customers as well. So that's happening, and that's being pushed by the investment community at the highest level in the capital markets. But as Will rightly says, in the UK, it has been a stop-start, and there is a real sort of chilling effect on investor confidence, which is, I think, most actually has the impact of stopping people getting trained. That's the pinch point. You know, the energy efficiency in all of this heating sector tends to be small businesses, and making the decision to train yourself up to do this stuff is a very, very major decision for those small businesses. So they have to be absolutely certain that there is a market for them to do that. Now, companies like ours can act as an aggregator, and we do that in those markets for ECO and now for the local authority delivery scheme. But to get it going, that's why things like the boiler ban and that certainty is so important, because it makes it very clear that the industry have this target. It is not going to change. There is not going to be a flip-flop between government. It's going to happen.
I completely agree, and it's, as Dan said, the larger companies will be training up their staff, but the little independent gas engineers that come out and service your boiler every year, they're the people that consumers are going to talk to if they're in their homes. And if they don't know or don't want you to switch to something else, then where does the consumer find the information, or gets that reassurance that it is a good thing, it is good to change to a heat pump or hydrogen or whatever the option is?
Yeah, I'd echo that, and the contracting businesses within the RSK group that are in this sector are starting to struggle in terms of recruitment, because there's a real skills gap, lack of engineers, electricians, etc. So I think, if there are any graduates listening or people at university, don't let your ambitions be working in a coffee shop. Get trained up as an electrician or an engineer, and you'll make some money going forward, definitely.
So we've got our another finance question. If gas utilization is reduced by 50 or 75% or more, how will the gas network owners be funded? As I understand, the network owners are funded by throughput, and from that, they provide emergency response and safety-related replacements.
It's a very tricky question. That I think I alluded to that, before, in terms of managing that transition as the market changes. I mean, simple economics says that as demand goes down, as demand goes down, the cost will increase. So that's a really tricky problem for the government to plan out. But I think it really indicates the need for any heat strategy, heat and building strategy in terms of efficiency, to take that into account and to be a long-term plan and to have bipartisan support. That's really important for us as a developer, as a landlord, as someone who's trying to plan to make this transition across 125,000 homes.
Because there were similar concerns raised around the electricity network as well, insofar as those people that couldn't effectively afford solar PV panels and all that kind of nature, they're exposed because they're consuming more of the electricity that's coming through the DNOs. There's more, greater cost of transmission, distribution. They're not, they're disproportionately hit. So it's not unique to the gas network, but you could equally argue these are national infrastructure priorities. Is it not common sense perhaps to completely review how these things are funded, owned and operated? A relatively left field suggestion, perhaps, nationalise the gas network or something along those lines. But,
I think it's clearly going to be a problem that is the National Infrastructure Commission is going to have to look at, and it's obviously being thought about at the moment. And it's not too dissimilar a problem to what the government is facing in terms of road tax, where as everybody changes over to electric vehicles at the moment. There's got to be a managed change in how we deliver those and maintain that kind of system that has always worked for in the past. So it's bound to be an issue, but it's not a good reason to not change.
So unfortunately, we've only got time for one more question, and that is, would implementing mandatory low flow temperature systems and improved heating controls with weather compensation, including the associated training, be a good start to preparing these heating systems to be more efficient later down the line, ideally gearing up to swap over to a heat pump system?
Yep.
Yeah. Look, it's really important. I mean, it's at very simple level, the basics of good heating design need to be reinforced and brought into a kind of zero carbon environment. There's not a lot of work that's been done on this area. It's been left behind for a little bit of time. But I think the engineers and the institutes and professional bodies are working on this, but we definitely support the improvement of standards and the setting of good standards for heating systems, so that we can make the changes in preparation for a zero carbon world.
A heating system designed with a flow temperature of 55 degrees, for example, that'll save a homeowner money, whether it's a gas boiler or a heat pump or what have you. It's a no-brainer, to use that horrible phrase, I'm afraid.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us, both panelists and attendees. I'm certainly heartened by the developments already underway to solve the issue, and hopefully the UK can start looking to some other regions that are already leading the way. It certainly seems as if cost is going to be a major hurdle, as well as a change in mindsets about how we heat our houses and the energy we use. Hopefully we will see the government stepping up to the challenge to transform the industry. And I'm sure if we can do it with cars, then we can certainly do it with homes. Just a reminder to please fill out the feedback survey that you're going to receive an hour after the webinar ends. And the next topic in our Green Dialogue series is on the 7th of October. Can we rewild land in our inner cities? That was a bit of a tongue twister. For more details about the webinar and to book, please visit the RSK website, and the link is in the chat box. Thank you so much again to our panelists for offering your amazing insights, and excited to see what you will do next. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thanks all.